Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg. You know who I am, right? I am Reverend Meg Biddle. I'm the National Coordinator for Ministry Life with ABHMS, the American Baptist Home Mission Societies. And this is the thing that brings me great joy, is sharing with you the stories of people who I've met in this journey. And today I am very excited to have with me, because I think he has a lot of great things to say, Reverend Dr. Eugene Downing. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. I am really excited. I think you have a lot of great things to say. So welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Meg. It's exciting to be with you on Ministry Mondays.
Yeah, whatever day you're watching. You know. So for people who don't know you, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody that doesn't know you.
Uh,
We just
Probably
met.
quite a few people. Yeah, right.
Well, let's fix that. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, and let's kind of go from there.
Sure. Thank you so much, Meg. Yeah, my name is Eugene Downing. I am pastor of New Hope Baptist Church in Northeast Denver. We're both American Baptist and National Baptist aligned. And I've been pastoring there for, I think this is my 12th year, actually. And I came here from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I pastored. And I actually did doctoral work there at Pittsburgh Theological. And I did my seminary work at Virginia Union. It's the same DeWitt Proctor School of Theology in Richmond. Yeah, very exciting place. Exciting
Yeah,
place. And so, yeah, grateful to be here and thankful to have opportunity to share with you.
yeah. And I'm really excited to have you here. And we love people, the folks at Proctor. We've been with them at a couple of events now.
Ah,
And yeah, I know some of our people, quite a big group with them went last year because it was in Georgia
oh,
last year, right?
okay. Uh,
I
I
believe.
it was yes, it was. It was
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
an
We had a
event.
group that
Oh,
that,
yeah,
that went.
it was.
Yeah,
Yep.
they went they had a they had a great time. So you've been a pastor. So was this your first call?
This is my
To
second. So I started in Richmond, actually, out of seminary. I had the privilege to work at the First Baptist Church of South Richmond as a staff pastor for about 5 years,
Okay,
and then went to Pittsburgh, where I pastored for 11 years.
okay.
Yep, and this is my 12th year at New Hope in Denver.
And New Hope in Denver.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. I've only been to. I was trying to think of my adventures. I've been on lots of them. Have I been there? I've been to the airport a couple of times.
Oh, you gotta get you to
But
Denver.
yeah, but I need to yeah, see Denver.
Yeah.
I need to adventure there. So, um, I was given your name and by actually a couple of people
Oh,
who
that's a blessing.
a couple of colleagues, and they're like, you should talk to Eugene because he's got stuff to say. And I know that we had a brief conversation before we started recording, but you do. You have some really great things that I think everyone, I mean, yes, clergy, but that really like everyone needs to hear
Hmm.
um, about about burnout and self
Thank you.
care and like. So how did how did this become a thing for you? Like, oh, I need to talk about this. Like, this is an
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think for me, probably like a lot of pastors, right? I got to like, I want to say the end of 2020, middle of 2021, and had been, preaching to a camera in an empty sanctuary for a year and a half, and then in conversation with other colleagues, and not only that, I think around that same year, Meg, I turned 50. And then around that same time, I had been in my pastorate here in Denver for 10 years. And I began to really think about my ministry from sort of a broad lens. And then I began to think really intently about some of the what I want to name as like new stressors in pastoral ministry and vocation, as it relates to some of the racial violence, some of the political challenges, some of the just division that created in communities. And with all of that, obviously now rethinking, like to the point of this wonderful podcast you've created, rethinking how faith communities will gather, how we'll be discipled, how we'll minister, and all of a sudden realizing, I think I'm tired, and so kind of trying to think through all of that in effective ways, as well as then share that with the leaders that God's blessed me to lead, the people God's called me to pastor among those leaders, and realize like, I'm not so sure, you know what I mean, which way to go, and
Yeah.
so I think that's what brought me to the idea of sabbatical. Mhm.
Okay. I mean, like so often it seems like you hear people, like sabbatical. I'm going to go on sabbatical and I'm going to write a book or I'm going to go do a big thing. Or it's something they do when they're trying to discern if they're going to come back and leave. I mean,
That too.
it, so when you came to this, like, I need to take sabbatical, what
Yeah.
was it just like, because I'll say this much, I left the church I was pastoring the end of February. We didn't yet know that
COVID
March
was coming, right?
14th was gonna be what that was. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have started here. I don't know.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I mean, so it how did all like, because I would think for me, like I would feel guilty. I'm in a pandemic. I mean, how did you go, no, this is something I gotta do and it's gonna be okay, and talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's a really helpful question. So, a few things came together. One thing is I was in pretty regular counseling with a really good therapist here in Denver.
Mhm.
I really recommend it. I mean, I
Yep,
can't say enough about
I'm a
that, right?
therapist.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I was in counsel with a really good therapist. And simultaneously, Meg, what began happening was I began looking around our region here in Denver. I'm in the Rocky Mountain region in terms of the Baptist denomination, but then more broadly than that, looking at colleagues around this geographical region, and it began seeing colleagues resign,
Mhm.
retire, sort of abruptly, uh, and also seeing colleagues become ill, um, cardiac issues, folks who were very healthy, and then a couple of colleagues who resigned. Among the two, and I mean in my locale, I want to say around that time, 4 or 5 pastors resigned in a period of, I'd say, 18, 24 months. Different denominations, none of whom were 60 or older. Not that age is a determining factor of
Mhm.
retirement, but no one was near quote unquote traditional retiring age. And so I was like, oh yeah, so and so resigned. Okay, yeah, it happens. And then say, oh, so and so stepped down. Okay, yeah. And after that happened the third time, I was like, time out. Like this
Right.
this is a little too, coincidental.
Oh,
And
sure.
then at the same time, you probably remember the Barna study came out about pastors walking away. And then Breonna Parker out of Texas, Dallas, I think, was partnering with Barna, and she released a study about the African American church post COVID.
Mhm.
And then around that same exact time, I was in conversation with my therapist. And finally, one day, I said to her, I said, I think I need to get some rest. She said, you think? She said, and then I responded, I said, well, I just want to be sure I don't get to burnout. She said, you are at burnout. And I remember it, Meg, like yesterday. It was like it was like one of the most simple and profound conversations I've ever had with anyone. And I
Mhm.
said, yeah, I said, I agree with you. I'm kind of getting there. I recognize this and I recognize that thing going on. I recognize how I respond to this and that we talked about. No, no, no. She said, no, you're not hearing me. You're at burnout. And she says, not only are you at burnout, she said, I'm not sure if you're going to make it 6 more months. She said, so if I were you, I would begin right now planning to step away. And I was like, oh my God, what, what, What makes you say that? And and here's the thing, Meg, she didn't list out like some cataclysmic life, matter I had going on. What she helped me to understand is that all of us too often press through just we just press through life so frequently that we think that's normal. And what she
Right.
did, yeah. And so I was sitting there waiting for her to, drop this bomb of, this inner life catastrophe I was experiencing. She's like, no, dude, you're tired. And she said, and you think it's noble to keep moving, though you know you're tired. And she said, we do it as a society. She said, so as a result, we don't think anything of actually being exhausted and keeping on. And I was like, and so then, as you know, right, I had this faith dilemma. I was like, well, my faith says, she's like, time out, Pastor. Jesus rested. Moses rested. Noah didn't have a choice but to rest, right? Esther stopped 3 days to think about what she's going to do. Mary had, all kinds of, she said, so dude, just like everyone else, you're tired. And she says, too often we teach each other that that's okay. She said, it's not normal. She said, well, we've normalized it. This society that we're in, she said, whether you want to call it capitalism, whether you want to call it commodification of labor, of gifts, of abilities, whatever you want to call it, she says, we've normalized pushing through exhaustion at the expense of our health and well-being. And she's like, you, sir, are tired. And I was like, And I just remember sitting silent like 10 minutes, like, And so I started kind of tracking through my mind. And that's, Meg, when I went back to my colleagues who had resigned. None of them, as far as I knew, had any cataclysmic event, right? They just got to this point where, like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm exhausted. I'm beyond, recovery. I'm walking away. And I was like, geez. And so all of that started flooding back like, okay, right. This makes sense now. It's exhaustion. It is trying to, learning curve of COVID, of dealing with an entire new society, how to relate to people again, how to put all of that into ministry and help people around me to grasp it while we're all moving together for 18, 24 months. And now you're exhausted. And I was like, wow, she's right. So, yeah.
I mean, all of this, one, I agree, like everyone, but especially those in ministry, but everyone really should have a therapist. And not just, oh, somebody you can talk to, and not just your pastor. Oh, please don't just give all that to your pastor. You know. Also not Catholic. I don't need to hear your confession.
It's like Meg said it, so Pastor, I'm here to talk to you.
Right, exactly. No, please. Somebody who is, we have how many classes about this in seminary? Like, really? Kind of thing. So why do you think that is, like, that we can't see? I think so often it's easy for us to go, Pastor Eugene, yeah, you're burnt out. But we can identify it in other people, but we can't in ourselves. Why? Is that just that need the value?
I think it's a couple of things. I think one, I was really blessed by a conversation I had about sabbatical beforehand with Otis Moss from Chicago, Trinity United Church of Christ. And he and I were talking, and he said, well, Eugene, he's like, Sabbath is biblical. He said, but we have sort of abandoned the concept. He said, but, other professions have picked it up. He said, CEOs take off unlimited amounts of time, different periods. He said, professors in university faculty and administrators take sabbaticals to do a number of different things. And he said, educators in public schools have months off during the summer. He said, even though if you look at their profession, it's probably not necessarily adequate, but that's a whole nother conversation, right? But the point is, he began to share with me how, in essence, we've kind of abandoned the concept. And in place of it, we've embraced this. We almost taken on, and I'm adding to our conversation now, but kind of taken on this sort of capitalistic model in the church, and not just in the church. We're thereby then teaching it to our congregation. And so, whether it is pastors who are overworking, or ministry groups who never pause, or congregations who never stop. I remember decades ago, Ralph West, pastor of the Church Without Walls in Houston, Texas. I remember one year when I was a staff pastor, actually, I remember my pastor coming back from Houston saying, "Hey, we're gonna take a weekend pause." I was like, "What? What you talking about, Pastor? Man, Pastor's not doing well." I mean, it's like because he went to Houston and came back with this concept because Pastor West's church had blocked out once a quarter in the calendar year where the church would close, ministry groups would stop, and nothing would happen. And there'll be a guest pastor on Sunday. And for that, I think it was 5 days, nothing would go on. And I remember the pastor coming back to our staff where I was working in Richmond, and us sitting there like, "What you talking about, Willis?" Like, it's just like, it's crazy. Was something wrong with him? And then we start.
Right? If I was still in a congregation, I would be like, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." But me, as the former pastor, goes, "Yes,
yeah,
that's brilliant."
yeah. And to your point, Meg, it's like, yeah, I don't know why we've done that, but it's almost as though we're, and we talked about this beforehand, like, so I found out during sabbatical a couple of things that, one, as a human race, we're so bound to production, like what I'm producing, my output, what I'm able to accomplish, and then how that becomes for me sort of a an indicator of my ability, my potential, my worth, my value. That all those things we kind of tie together. And as you and I know, definitely in churches, because that's one of the first things we ask each other when we meet, right? "Oh, where's your church?" And then depending on who you're talking to, how many members you have? What are you guys doing for Easter this year? How big was your Christmas play? It's like, huh? What just happened? And so we do it so frequently. And naturally, in every sector of our society, everything is measured by production, by output, by commerce. Now, obviously, not to say that doesn't have value. No one wants to, be contributing anything and not see any positive outcome. That's not what I'm saying. But to your question, this idea that we have sort of abandoned the concept of rest, and we've taken on this idea that somehow, because we are people of faith, because we're pastors, because I'm called to this, I can continue to function and be all right without ever resting. And that is the biggest misnomer I've known. And it took me a while to get there, but I finally figured out, dude, that is and Meg, here's the killer, right? The kicker. Hold on, the killer. Because the kicker is, I can remember when I first got to Denver, having a conversation with a couple elder pastors. I remember them saying to me, "Hey, Eugene, you need to take off 2 days a week, no less than one, but you need two. And you need to leave your office no later than 4 o'clock every day that you're there." And I was like, man, they're not
Who are
serious
these
about ministry.
people? Wow.
Right. And I remember Meg sitting there like, yeah, they're old schoolers. They're probably tired. They're probably near retirement. They just don't know. And over time, realizing that in that conversation with my therapist that day, that's when it all came together. It's like, this is what they've been talking about. This is what this means. This is how this intersects. And this is this concept that I have unconsciously adopted. Just keep working. It'll work out. Just keep going. Yeah, it'll all come together. Just keep going. Don't worry about stopping. Just keep going. And whatever's wrong, it'll work out along the way. Just keep working. You know what I mean? And then to add to that, to add to it, Meg, what I learned during sabbatical was able to, both through some research I did, some family history. I did a genealogy during my sabbatical, the last leg of it, and then kind of went back to some seminary study that I'd done, and was able to kind of pull together sort of these nuances of sort of cultural understanding about rest, meaning an African American community, and I would say communities of color in large measure, that we are, I think, even a little more driven to believe that our work and our worth are intertwined. That, if I look at the legacy, whether it's a legacy of enslavement in our country, whether it's the legacy of labor in Latin American communities and other communities, this idea that if I'm not working, then how is my worth measured in this society? As we look at, as people of African descent, we came to this country based on work. We came here to produce, to output. And so I think it's a trait we've carried as a community forward, so that we're looking at one another in family, in community, in churches, kind of carrying this mentality to the point when someone says something about resting, everybody's like, what's he talking about? What?
Right.
You're gonna take a vacation? How
Right.
long are you gonna be gone? Like, really? And so this idea that stopping to breathe then becomes a threat to one's identity, to one's sense of worth in society, one's ability to contribute, something valuable, because we stop.
Mm.
Whereas if we look at, whether it's Exodus 20, right? Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Whether we look at Genesis, where God says, I made them male and female, I made them in my own image. This idea that God made us living beings, which means at our very essence, we were made to be. Yet we've adopted this idea, I've been made to do. I got to go do something. I got to do something. You know what I mean? And so it's like, yeah, I think, that those are the things anyway, in my experience, that kind of led me to this understanding of how did I get here? So this sort of cultural nuance compounded on top of this capitalistic perspective, on top of sort of abandoning the value of the Sabbath. Yeah.
So there's that attitude, as terrible as it is, like, oh, I'll rest when I'm dead. That taking that rest, oh, I'm retiring, I'm resting, I'm done, I'm finished.
That's right. I
That,
retire. All right.
I got it. I got, yeah.
Yeah. And we hear
And
people say it. We hear people say, oh, the Bible says, work while it is day, because the night will come when no one can work. It's like, like,
the night will come. Go to bed. And I realize I say this not as a person in a pulpit anymore, because I remember those, like, you felt like you needed to thank your congregation for allowing you
yeah.
to take the vacation that they owed you,
Mm.
or allowing you to go to do a continuing education, or thank you for allowing.
And so pastors have done for decades. We've been taught that, and we subconsciously, unconsciously carry it forward. I was in part of my sabbatical, I went to Duke Divinity School for study leave. Wonderful program, matter of fact, I would recommend it. And somewhere in the throes of that week, I had a conversation with another pastor who was in the program, and somewhere in the end of the conversation, and it was toward the close of the program's week, and we were just kind of sharing our experience of the week. It's like, so what you preaching Sunday? And I was like, oh, I said, I'm on sabbatical. What? Sabbatical? And I mean, he just froze. He's like, you do realize we're coming out of a pandemic? You just left your congregation? And I was like, well, I mean, I was like, I'm not sure I see myself as having left my congregation. I see myself as trying to get renewed so that I can go serve the congregation in more efficient ways and take care of myself so that I don't break down. And here's what happened, Meg. We shared conversation that day for about 45 minutes. And in the course of the conversation, which is how helped me come to this understanding about the value of sabbatical and talking about it, of course, that conversation, that other pastor, probably unknowingly, was literally listing out to me every struggle in their ministry. And I sat, and at the end of every sort of, bullet point raised, and that's why you shouldn't be taking a sabbatical, because I'm dealing with this in my ministry. I was like, yeah, man, that's tough. Yeah. And then, we had this shooting down the street, and that's why you got to be there, and then, and one of my brother-in-laws got sick, and that's why you should take care of yourself while you're serving. And it's like, and so as I listened, the more intently I listened, the more I began to feel for my colleague, and then just think about all of us like, man, we are really wearing ourselves out, And so it just really impressed upon me the deep importance of all of us as pastors being able to be more vulnerable with ourselves, and then more vulnerable with each other, in what really constitutes faithfulness. This idea is, it, so that to your last question, it's almost like we've equated faithfulness and success, right? So am I successful or am I faithful? If I even think about, if I go out to, if I think about Muhammad Ali, Muhammad Ali said, I've become a champion because he said, I decided, he said, I will, uh, basically he said, I do this thing which I just don't like doing, which is I exercise, I punish my body every day, I work out as hard as I can so I can become a champion for the rest of my life, right? But he never said so I can succeed. What he was talking about was being faithful with his craft. He wasn't talking about I'm going to win every single fight. He said I'm just going to be faithful to what I'm doing. And it's like we've looked at this thing as I got to be successful, and then who even knows what that means, right? You know, we start measuring ourselves, comparing ourselves based on other colleagues, other churches, other ministries, other contexts, and we sort of lose sight of what has God called me to do? What does God expect of me? You know, and Meg, being able to be fine with whatever that is, and knowing that that's what pleases God. If I'm faithful with what God expects of me, I think I've pleased God. But if I'm trying to be faithful with what my colleague across town is doing, like, dude, sister, you're going to wear yourself out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of this, yes, absolutely. Um, and then there comes the whole bad behavior because somebody has burned out and they're showing up on Sunday morning because that's where their paycheck is, not because, you know, of their deep commitment. Not that, but it's just so utterly broken.
Yep.
And you get to it
A,
and
yeah, a colleague who's no longer with us, so I can tell the story. I think tells a story. This is long ago, so I think the statute of limitations has expired.
Yeah.
But the colleague told me a story once about burnout. We were having a conversation about burnout many years ago before it ever landed. And this was an elder colleague. He said, "Yeah," he said, "Eugene, you know, there was a colleague in a church I know well, and he said we were trying to convince the colleague that he was burned out, and they just wouldn't believe us. And he said, and I got a call one day about what happened at the church. I said, what happened? He said, well, he said, turns out the colleague was known for being in their office and having a cocktail, just to get through a rough week or whatever case may be, right? So he said, point is, he said that he had grown to the point where, there was an understanding between he and the office administrator. If my door is closed, I either want time, I'm having a cocktail, or I'm burned out, and I just need no interruptions. That's what it was. So he said, actually, I shared too much, but anyway, he said, so doors closed. So he says, one day, around this time we're trying to convince they're burned out, the secretary had forgotten the rhythm of signals, opened the door, and out comes the pastor and blasts the secretary. I told you this was my time, blah, blah. But then the telltale of burnout spills out when the pastor then goes into the hall and begins blasting all of their critics and sort of worst enemies, if you will. And Meg, I think the reality is all of us, have been inches from a moment just like that. But I think the difference is this idea of friends or colleagues who say, hey, maybe you need rest. And our unwillingness, to your point about behavior, our unwillingness to accept I'm at the line doesn't mean I'm inadequate for ministry. Doesn't mean God's not still able to use me. Doesn't mean I'm unfaithful. It means I'm at the line of my human ability, my limited capacity to go forward. I need to stop,
And I mean, I think we have a responsibility, and by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have a responsibility to our colleagues to say, hey, dude, I'm worried about you. Like, A, do you have a therapist? B, when's the last time you took a day off? Have you seen your primary care physician?
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. primary care physician, your dentist, are you ignoring and avoiding little physical symptoms that you've grown accustomed to that are all a part of your holistic well-being that impact you in every room that you enter. And you when we brush them off, I'm a pastor, I'll be fine. Oh yeah, I do have that issue with my back, but it's okay. Yeah, I did pull that hamstring. Oh yeah, I got that nerve that keeps jumping, but it's all good. So
Right.
it's right. You know what I mean? And so it's like we do these things, and I've been there. I think I'm certain I was there before sabbatical. I was at a place where I was addressing challenges in ministry and maybe in personal life in ways that were unhealthy, and realizing like, dude, all this is together. It's not, in these boxes that we've been taught to create to sort of compartmentalize life. It all goes together. And as you know, as a pastor, Meg, you all of those things come into a room with us. Just like educators, just like social workers, just like leaders and many other facets of life that we bring. All those things come with us, and they're all of value, right? When we're healthy.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, yeah.
So when someone hits that burnout wall, I mean, obviously for yourself, but like s- sometimes, a lot of times, oftentimes, it goes further than that.
Mm.
How do you, is there coming back? How do you come back? I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think so. I mean,
like your colleagues that walked away, that retired. Is there coming
yeah.
back? Or should there be?
Well, well, right. So I
Yes,
think
and right. I mean,
yes, and both and right. I think
mhm.
I think to the point at the beginning of our conversation, my therapist said to me, "Hey, you're burned out. You get some rest." And so I think for me, I never questioned coming back. I never felt like, this is a way for me to, to your point earlier. And some people said it to me when I took sabbatical. This is a way of exiting, with dignity or something. You're going to say you're sabbatical and you're just going to leave. Like, no, I don't. I can just, like, I don't see that to be helpful. I mean, it's like
Right.
added stress. No. I think that there is a way to recover. I do, and I think it begins with that willingness to have an honest conversation with ourselves. I read Abram Heschel's book. I was in a cohort group, and deeply valuable in our region here of Episcopal, Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, everybody. You know, wonderful men and women, tremendously diverse and well-rounded group, and we had honest conversations with each other. And we had conversations about what we saw in each other and what we saw in ourselves. And I really believe that all of us in pastoral, all of us in ministry of any sort need a group of cohorts. We need an accountability group. We need some people who can speak into us and some people who can speak with us and to us about our lives. You got to have it. And Meg, that may not always be of clergy, right? That accountability group could be of, I've got a group of college buddies that I'm really close to. I've got a group of just life friends that I can be Eugene with, who don't need pastoral care from me, right? But with whom I can be the person God made me to be without the titles I bring and the pastoral duties, where I can just sit down, open myself to my friends, and they can tell me what they see. Hey, dude, I want to take a look at that. You know what I mean? So it's yeah. So I think that's a huge part of it. And without appropriating Meg, I think from what I observed about researching sabbatical, rest, burnout, I think, well, first of all, the Barna data actually says that millennials in ministry and women in ministry are a little more deeply impacted. And it almost makes sense because it's hard as heck to be a woman in ministry. First of all, I don't care what denomination you're in. Right? Millennials, I'm not sure what the sort of background of that is, but I say all that to say, like, I don't know that it makes a difference as much, like what my gender is, or what my background, my generation. All of us need support. And it's a misnomer to assume that because of whatever background I bring, regardless of my, how I identify, I need support, no matter who I am. And I just think that's the beginning of finding value in sabbatical, of overcoming burnout. I've got a support group. And then two, to your point earlier, finding a professional or someone qualified to be able to point out to us those things for which we need resource to resolve and tools to manage. You know,
What did you, after sabbatical, I
hmm
mean, what did you learn? How did you did you find that things about you had changed when you came back, when you resumed your role as Pastor Eugene?
hmm
Okay, I'm burnt out. Let's prepare for sabbatical. We go through sabbatical through your Duke and all. Did, did you come back changed, or did
Oh
you
man,
come back I mean, the
yeah,
person
yeah,
that you used to know, kind of thing.
right, absolutely. But not but, and it takes intention, right? So to your point, so sabbatical for me wasn't just like time off. Oh, you gonna take time off, and back to maybe part of our issue that I don't know is like, well, I'm gonna take sabbatical. I'm gonna be doing this. I'm gonna be doing that. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. My wife was like, hey, time out, time out. You're doing too much. Like you are already about to mess this all up. So I was like, oh no, I'm gonna, Meg, I was like, I'm gonna do these home projects. I'm gonna repair that back door. I'm gonna like I have this stuff I'm going to do, and I'm gonna write something, and I'm gonna create this. And it's like, hey, dude, you're messing up. I was like, no, no. I was like, you don't understand, honey. This is how it goes. I'm a pastor. I'm taking sabbatical, and this gonna be productive. I'm gonna be accomplishing stuff. I'm gonna come back here on fire. She's like, you're not. She's like, you're about to blow an ACL. Right? That's what you're about to do. And so,
I appreciate her very much. It's like, listen, no, no,
yeah. And
fair
so
enough.
I realized that planning sabbatical takes as much intention as
Mm.
participating in one. And so I slowed down and I talked to my therapist, and I obviously had a very thorough conversation with my wife. And then I looked at what my real needs were. I was, again, vulnerability, right? I was able to those were kind of insecurities coming out, maybe sort of, this sort of identity I'm trying to maintain as this, effective pastor. I put all that aside and said, okay, what do I really need in order to thrive?
Mm.
I identified three areas. One was I felt I needed to recapture my personal identity. Who am I? At the very basic essence, who am I? Where did I come from? So I planned into sabbatical, taking a trip back to where my father's family came from in this country and researching our genealogy and having conversations with literally traveling to family members' homes, their part of the country, sitting down, just having conversation. How did this uncle over here connect with that? And what does that mean to me? I went to my father's family, landed in this country in which a lot of us did, in Virginia. And so I went to that little tiny county where our records trace, sat down. I had a 2-hour session with a genealogist and traced our family history back to 1838 and had these conversations about my identity based on my actual genealogy, the history of our family, what our people have been through. And it connected so many dots, Meg. And I'm like, man, look at that. Look at there. Look at that. Huh. From because so if you do those in the case I had, those genealogy records also, Meg, had health outcomes, right? And so
I
I
didn't think
was
about that.
Yeah, I was able to trace health outcomes of my ancestors and see patterns. I was like, holy crap, look at this. This guy had that. This woman had that. She had it. He has it. Whoa, it's over there. It's over here. Oh my God. Like, wow. And then looking at both work habits and concepts of labor and rest and all of that intertwined with who I am. What is my identity? What's important to me? What hobbies, give me joy? What things do I like to do that enliven my soul, man? And why have I stopped? Why should I stop doing? Because you're a pastor. You can't do that. You're a pastor. You can you can't be mountain hiking as a pastor. You can't be tree climbing and that's the best a pastor does. You're a pastor. So I began like and realizing going back to that Genesis passage, God created us as living beings, and I've discarded the being part. I'm just like, dude, this is who God made you. You need to recapture. So that was the first piece, and then rebuilding pastoral identity, I think was my second piece. I wanted to completely to give myself permission to revisit who I am as a pastor and what I think my calling is and how I pursue it. And in doing that, I went back to Pittsburgh where I did my doctoral work, sat down with my doctoral advisor, who is now a therapist and a pastoral coach. And I, entered into a contract with him. And so I'm in now. I did my first session with him during sabbatical, and I'm now in my fifth, I think. And so I'm doing regular coaching with him. And because it's helpful that he's known me before this moment. But to your question, it was one of the critical pieces of coming back different, of looking at Eugene, how I promise you, Meg. So this dude, oh gosh, here's this conversation with me. He's like, so tell me about this, this interchange you had in leadership. I'm like, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. He's okay. Tell me about a time before that we had a similar experience. I was like, oh yeah, maybe over here. Tell me about another one. All of a sudden he's like, what's the first time that ever happened to you in life? I was like, what? Man, you're tripping. It's like, no, think about it. A similar experience where, similar outcomes trying to solve a problem where you, right, look at you, you're like, wheels turning, right? All of a sudden, I'm like 8 years old, in elementary school. I'm like, dude, are you serious right now? He's like, oh, yeah. It's like it all works together. And so I made intention around trying to rebuild my pastoral identity, looking at discerning anew how I am called to relate to God's people as a pastor, a preacher, a theologian. What does it mean to do ministry in this moment? And accepting the fact that some of the things that we did in ministry, Meg, don't exist anymore. And coming to grips with that and being okay about it. Like, some of the stuff I won't be able to do it anymore. So rebuilding that pastoral identity with help, with a coach, reinvesting in those cohort groups and trying to keep those things out. And then the last piece was I wanted to reestablish space to dream about ministry. So I came back, and one of the first things I did, and my leaders were really just blessing, while I was away and when I came back. And not to say it was all like, silky smooth. Ooh, sabbatical, that would be easy. Oh, yeah, let's take a piece of cake. It wasn't. Right. So it's a lot of work to plan a sabbatical, as you know, I'm sure. But coming back and having a really honest conversation with my leaders. Like, hey, you know what? I need this to thrive, and them saying, hey, Pastor, we need this from you. Okay, let's talk about those two things and see if we can meet in the middle. And then having some real hard conversations, around what is God calling us to do? Where have I missed the mark? Where have we missed the mark? And how do we make up the ground by going to God together? And to your point, I learned through that process, Meg, that it's not just, oh, sabbaticals are cure all. Woo, everything's better. It doesn't work that way. No, it's this, building intention into the process, holding ourselves accountable, having that accountability group around us. And I would strongly recommend identifying some specific goals for sabbatical. Not a ton, like I said before, I'm not trying to fix the house, do this, blah, 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 but maybe it's just a few goals to which we can hold ourselves accountable and really striving to accomplish them for our well-being. Yeah.
And as we were talking before we started recording, you have not yet put this into a book or right. This is like
right. No, not yet.
Because I mean, you're right. Like it's not earth shattering. Oh my gosh! But it's things like when you're in that, like you need to hear somebody else say, okay, make your sabbatical list.
Yeah.
Then cut it in half then give it to your spouse and let your spouse edit it, and let your spouse cut it in half,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's about the all people need to hear about the permission giving.
Yeah.
Um, you giving yourself permission to rest and your congregation going, we love our pastor and we want our pastor to be able to continue to be healthy and to continue to serve.
Mhm.
And so for not just the good of themselves, but also that
Right.
they see that for the good of the body of Christ, that this is why
Mhm.
Sabbath is
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
Um, it is my really sincere hope and prayer that you have the opportunity to share this. I mean,
Thank you.
you just did with my audience, but I mean, that this that this that this keeps going
Yeah.
and because yes, that you hear it every single day,
Every day,
you
man.
know,
The
that
data is so real. Like pastors are walking away, pastors are retiring early, pastors are looking at other careers. And I was talking with a colleague just this week, and we were talking about the fact that, like, okay, we know that the the this the New York, there's several studies. I don't have to name one. Several studies about American religion and sort of dissolving, and folks are walking away from the church. But the reality is, we're still called to be the church. We're still called to ministry. So how do we sustain ourselves? Not like we're going to all just say, "All right, well, hey, oh, that was great." It's like, so, what I mean? So since we're called to it, how do we sustain ourselves? How do we thrive through all of this stuff? And knowing it's real, and helping the generations after us. Like, how do we help someone after us to learn from our experience and realize that it's okay to open up and tell a colleague, hey, dude, sister, it's, we're in this together.
yeah,
So yeah, I agree with you. I think writing something about it would be a blessing, to just an opportunity just to kind of share what I've been blessed to experience, and to be able to, if any way, help anyone else. I just feel grateful for such an opportunity, because I just feel like during that period of sabbatical, and even after. So I had the opportunity before, during, and after. I had intentional conversation with about 18 pastors, Brooklyn, Denver, Richmond, Colorado Springs, about 10 different cities altogether. Some of them were just telephone calls, some of them were one-on-ones. And Meg, I assure you, the common thread through every single conversation was, I'm tired, man. And all of us were like, yeah. Well, one was like, yeah, well, I'm going to Vail and ski a couple of weeks. One's like, yeah, well, I'm just going to not preach for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm going to figure that out. And one was like, yeah, but the common thread was, what I mean? We're all tired. Like this COVID thing, the change of our world, the impact of post Christendom, name whatever you want. Like, it has impacted the Christian church forever, right? And so our ability to just come to grips with that, what I mean? I think it's going to take a lot of resource for us. And so, yeah, um, I think,
January 6th, all of that.
yeah, with crosses, right? and
Mm,
and prayer, no less, and prayer, invoking the Lord's name in prayer with that. Yeah, right.
right, right. And mhm, um, I mean, I get it. What people, why I get what people are like. All right, God, I love you, but I'm done.
Yeah, yeah,
I, you, I get
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Um, I do. So I do. I hope that you have the opportunity to continue to share this, because I really do think it is such a blessing for others to be able to hear this and go,
Mm,
what but what I hear in all of this, even though the word was not spoken, is that I still hear in you the hope. There's never
mm.
not
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
there's not the I was so defeated. I was so,
Mm.
it was I did the work. I
Mm.
did what needed to be done.
Oh yeah,
And I'm continuing
oh
to
yeah.
do what needs to be done. so that I can still do what needs to be done.
Mhm,
That I
mhm,
this my identity, my who I am called to be.
mhm,
Um, and that's what about the small part of your story that I know
mhm.
is that I appreciate the most is that in all of it I hear hope
Oh, yeah,
is
thank
what I
you. I
hear.
appreciate
So,
that.
um,
Yeah.
and I do want to mention the your website, the dreugenedowning.org, and you're also on Facebook and Instagram, and I'll put all that in the show notes. I'm gonna get
Thank
that Barna episode
you.
or
Yeah,
the Barna article pulled up, and
I
I
can
will
see
also
that.
put that in show notes for listeners or viewers. And I have to ask you the question, my favorite question, the joy question.
Ah, yeah.
Okay. So you can answer this. The rule is you can answer this however you want. And I told you, you are episode number 50. Ta-da, I feel like I should have cannons or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, we need to, yeah,
Um,
right.
in 50 episodes, it has not been answered the same way,
Hmm.
which I love. I love. Um, that everyone's joy
Mhm,
is completely their own and there is not a wrong answer.
mhm.
So all you where where do you where do you find
Hmm. Well, first of all, I really want to say that the work you're doing with this platform is really phenomenal. I mean,
it?
yeah, it really is. It's very courageous. First of all, you know what I mean, to step out. Well, I'm gonna start a ministry. Oh yeah, where? Online. Oh man, you know, it's
Sure, why
just
not? Right, sure, why not?
yeah. But I
Plus
mean,
podcast, whatever.
yeah, it's really phenomenal. So thank you for
Thank
what you're
you.
doing. And I think to answer your question, honestly, I really do find joy in my family, man. My wife and our daughters. You know, so our daughters are adults now. Our wife had children young, and so now our kids are late 20s, early 30s. And so when I said, "Oh, I'm gonna take a sabbatical," honestly, I was it was early on, and I was like trying to convince myself. You know how you try to convince yourself sometimes? Yeah, I'm gonna do this. Oh yeah, of course I'm gonna do it. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I go talk to my kids. They're like, "You don't sound like you're serious." And I was like, so I'm like, you don't understand. You know what I mean? You don't understand ministry. You don't realize what this entails. Whatever. What we do know is you're a mess. Like you're not sleeping well. You know what I mean? Your eating habits are all crazy. Mom says you're around the house trying to fix everything. So it's like, you know, whether it's children or close family members, it's like I find joy in those folks who know me for who I am,
Mm,
yeah, and can have the most fun-filled moments over absolutely nothing. It's just like the
yeah.
simplest stuff, burst into laughter, and I can just be myself and find safety in that conversation, in that room. I can find connection, with who I am as a person and a pastor, and I can share the same with others without judgment, without worry about if I've quoted the right Bible verse or if I, you know, led the right leadership paradigm, but just connecting with family who remind me of who I am. And I think, Meg, in these last, as you mentioned, these crazy last few years, that for me has been a godsend to just be in the living room, you know, doing whatever we're doing, laughing about whatever we're laughing about, and everything just kind of fades, and just being able to, thank God for whether it's my uncle or my aunt, my grandmother, or my mom, just being able to just reconnect with, who I am. So yeah, family, I would say.
That's a great answer. And you know what? 50 episodes. Still going strong. I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
still going strong, which is
That's super
I mean,
cool.
that it's great because even if people do say family, no one says it's the same way,
Mm,
and which is beautiful and lovely. I am so grateful for you,
thank you.
for
Same
giving
here.
your time and sharing this piece of your journey.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and I'm grateful for our audience, those
Yeah, that's really awesome. Congratulations for 50 episodes or
thank you. Go for
800
the
viewers. I mean, that's really
yay.
that's a wonderful, wonderful ministry. I mean, geez, that's a blessing. It's a blessing.
And I hope that that you make some great connections as a result of
Thank
this.
you. Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and just a reminder to our viewers, you can also listen to us on Spotify, on whatever the Apple listing podcast thing is. I'm sorry, I'm an Android person. And we're on YouTube. We're in all sorts of places. Just
Awesome.
Google Ministry Mondays with Meg and you'll find us. And we'll put all those
Well,
connections
I
in the
want
show
you, and I want my T-shirt too. I want a Ministry Monday T-shirt. I got to.
right. But remember, audience, you're going, I too would like a t-shirt. Yes, I too would like you to be a guest on my show, most likely. So, you can get a hold of me. We can make that happen. Probably. I know it will. So, thanks everybody for watching, for listening, and we hope that you find that thing that brings you joy and do it for the glory of the Lord.
Amen.
So, thank
Amen.
you for watching, everyone.